Welcome to Enlightenment of Change on webtalkradio.net. I'm your host, Connie Whitman. As always, I'm honored that you're joining us. Now, every week as you listen to the show, I really hope you feel my passion for change, right? What does that mean? I know it makes us sick to our stomach sometimes, especially if we didn't choose the change. But we are here, my guests are here. We want to give you tips, strategy that are actionable at the end of the show so you can implement and create the successful future that you dream of. Now, to help you in that support of change, I'd love you to come and join my all-star community where we meet twice a month. We have a whole bunch of speaking things. We share resources. We have a lot of fun. And again, it's all about supporting you and helping you grow. The link is in the show notes. So please come and play and become part of my all-star community. I'd be honored to have you join. Now, my motivational quote today is by Laura Holloway. And Laura says, storytelling is our obligation to the next generation. If all we do is marketing, we are doing a disservice, and not only to our profession, but to our children and their children. Give something of meaning to your audience by inspiring, engaging, and educating them with a story. Stop marketing, start storytelling. Now, I believe we all have a good story, right? In fact, what do? We watch TVs, we watch movies because we love the storytelling that happens within them and the journey that it takes us on through the characterization, et cetera. But somehow in business, I think we get a little disconnected between storytelling and our brand. And like me, I'm sure many businesses spend tons of money, right, on marketing, believing that it's going to make all the difference. And sometimes I feel like we're missing the greatest marketing advantage each of us actually have, and that's telling our story and our unique story that could resonate with more potential customers and obviously make them into clients. Now, the fact is business needs more than marketing. We need that storytelling and branding. So of course I have an amazing guest today, Paul Furiga, and his book, which I think everybody should buy and read, Summer on the Beach. Nice time to read a new book. And the book is called Finding Your Capital S Story, Why Your Story Drives Your Brand. And it takes you, Paul takes us on a journey to understand the research and history of how storytelling is actually scientifically, biologically, and historically the best marketing you have available. Now, Paul has written and edited over 20,000 stories as a journalist, covering everything from murder to the White House. When he moved into the agency side of the marketing world, he spent a few years at Ketchum, long known as one of the world's top PR firms. Now, for the last 20 years, Paul has led his own firm, Word Right, where storytelling is the linchpin of the offering and his client's success. Today, we're going to discuss his book, his model, and a whole bunch of cool things that are actionable for you at the end of the show. So, Paul, thanks for being on the show, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Connie. I'm excited as well. It's great to be with you and with all of your audience, and I get to talk about a subject that I'm so passionate about, which is storytelling.
Yeah. So let's start. I guess the first question is, why is storytelling really important, especially for businesses?
Well, there's two reasons, and one of them has to do with who we are as human beings, and that is we are wired for story biologically. I wasn't there, but I imagine when the first human being figured out how to make a fire on purpose, they told a story to educate the second person who learned how to do a fire, right? Because this is how we communicate. We communicate in narrative. That's the way human beings are wired. Now, the second reason why storytelling is so important in business today, we are inundated with information. I can get on the internet right now and find out what the temperature is in Stockholm. Do I need to know that? No, I do not.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody does, but it's all out there. Without any effort on our part, depending on the research you look at, Connie, we are bombarded just as human beings walking around minding our business by between 5,000 and 10,000 messages a day.
Yeah.
Everything from notifications on our computer, notifications on our phone, texts, billboards, you name it. There's so much clutter out there. We don't know how to make sense of what's going on in the world. See, here's the thing. That's what stories do in our brains. Here's a fun little experiment that was done in the last 10 years, university research. Everything I just talked about, digital clutter, the researchers thought, well, let's see what impact this is having on human beings. I know what we'll do. We'll wire people's brains up with electrodes. And on the rational thinking side of the brain, we want to see what happens when there's too much information. And we'll take that foo-foo creative side of the brain, and that'll be the control. Because after all, nothing's going to happen there, right? So they wired up all these test subjects and bombarded them with information, and an amazing result occurred. The scientists are watching the imaging of people's brains as they're being overwhelmed by information. And information did come in on the rational side of the brain, and then it went into the creative side of the brain and back to the narrative side of the brain. And the scientists thought to themselves, what the heck is happening here? So they talked to all the subjects, interviewed them, and what they learned was, with all this information coming in, the human brains in their study, indeed all of our human brains, were taking this clutter and turning it into narrative so that they could understand it. That's why storytelling is so important in business. We're wired for it from the very beginning as we were created. And secondly, that's the way we make sense of the world today when we're overwhelmed with information.
Fascinating. So I hired a coach, a writing coach, Brian Morgan. Shout out to you, my friend. And we talk about, we're trying to be thoughtful in our posts on LinkedIn. That's specifically where my people play. Yes. And his people play, right? So our group, his clients that we kind of work together as well. We do some group stuff. And it's fascinating because as he goes through and teaches us, it's all about, you tell the story and then it's your perspective, right? So make that clear in whatever we write, and then go on to make the point based on the story, our perspective. What is the point, or what is the bridge, he calls it, so that the person can digest that information through their perspective, yes. Right? So we think, like we say things like, oh, every business owner should have a story in branding. Well, where did that come from? What does that mean? How does it affect me? That's too broad, that there's no bridge for me to relate it to. Well, actually, how do I use that in business? So what you just described, right, is that thoughtful piece of storytelling. Here, the fire, right, way back in the caveman days, and how that translate over to the business through your research and through your perspective of that research. So it's just fascinating how we talk at each other. And sometimes we're not really making sense, or I'm spewing my opinion, but I'm not grounding it with anything. And then people look and go, she's an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about because it doesn't agree with their perspective, right?
Yes. Yes. And, when you're talking about marketing and business, some description of what we're trying to do is take people from where they are, which is what you just said, their perspective, to where we want them to go. Yeah. And the narrative is the transportation mechanism that allows you to do that. You have to meet people where they are. I heard that somewhere.
Yes. Amen. Even sales, right? I'm sales. And I can't tell you the number of time, even my clients, they push the product, and they're lovely people. Yes. They don't think they're pushing. They think they're serving. You're not, when you're saying, here's my product and this is why it's going to help you. Oh my God, it's so good. And they're probably right. But if the person isn't ready for that next piece of the puzzle in whatever you're selling, they're not going to buy from you. And then you get frustrated, like, I'm attracting the wrong people. Well, maybe follow up with those people, right? And let them catch up to where you are, or offer a different product or service to meet them where they are. So amen. That one is a big one for me as well.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
It's one quick thought on this. So a lot of our work is derived from the work of Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, but also thought leaders such as Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek's written 3 great books: Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last, and The Infinite Game, all of which I recommend. But the basic premise with Start With Why is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Yeah. The why is your story. If you're in a business where there are 2 or 3 or 5 fairly equal competitors, how is your prospective buyer going to make the decision So an example that we use, we work with a lot of law firms and professional services. You can't be a lawyer unless you're licensed. So if you all have the same license, you all went to law school, how is a smart CEO who doesn't really know that much about your expertise in law going to make a decision about which one of you to hire? I would argue, and the entirety of our work at our company is focused on, it's your story. Who are you? Why should they hire you, your company, your firm, compared to all the others? And, Sinek talks about companies like Apple. He has a great discussion about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, a bunch of bicycle mechanics in Dayton, Ohio, they figured out how to fly. Their passion drove them. It wasn't that they had the most money, which, to your point, Connie, you can waste a lot of money on marketing. In my world, if you don't have your story straight first, you are going to waste money on marketing. And I don't want anybody to do that. We say at our firm, don't spend a single dollar on your marketing unless you know what it's going to get for you.
That's right. That's right.
Starts with your story.
Yeah. And it always starts with the story. And I love your example with fire. They had to teach. How do you teach?
Yes.
How do you create an actionable thing that they can duplicate to create the fire? It's the exact same thing we're trying to do today when I teach sales or you teach storytelling, yes. Right? How do I get you to tangibly understand what that next step is for you right here, right now, where you are, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the importance of what you do with your clients. Talk to me, Paul, tell us the difference between brand and story, because I think that gets convoluted a little bit sometimes.
It really does. And, there's a large organization that represents the biggest companies in the world called the Conference Board. And I'm always dismayed every year because they have a monthly magazine and they put out an issue that's the best brands or whatever. And all it is company logos. And unfortunately, while company logos are part of your brand, they're not your story. Okay. I write in the book about Nike. People do not buy Nike shoes because they're in love with the swoosh. Is the swoosh distinctive? Yes, it is. But that's not why they're buying the shoes. They're buying the shoes because of the story. And Nike is one of the greatest storytelling companies in the world. They actually had a person, Nelson Ferris, who most of his career at the company had the title of Chief Storyteller. Right?
I love it.
The thing is, when we buy Nike products, those of us who do, we are joining a story. And that story is we're part of a company, even if we're weekend warriors, that equips some of the finest athletes in the world. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we're buying there. And so it starts with the story, right? Do people pay more for clothing because it has a swoosh on it versus something that's very similar next to it that doesn't have a swoosh on it? Yes, but let's not get confused as business leaders and start at the end of the story, if you will, and say, oh, I want a blue logo, or I want something like this. Okay, great. Maybe you need that. But let's talk about your story first. Let's talk about why people should buy from you. Or as I often say, why people should buy for you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. Those are really the questions that your capitalist story answers.
Yeah, and I'm giggling because two things, right? I had hired when COVID hit, I hired someone to help me rebrand. Let me tell you, my brand was Whitman and Associates from 21 years ago.
Right.
And it was like I was a lawyer, right? That's what it looked like, but that was appropriate back then. So now with the digital marketplace, right? My personality wasn't being shown through Whitman and Associates.
Sure.
So it's Whitman Associates doing business as changing the sales game,
right.
Which was a good switch for me because it incorporates a little bit of my energy and story because the game, my kids played hockey. So I use a lot of references with business. So it was the right thing for me, right? It was the right fit, but you have to talk to someone to figure that out, because let me tell you, Paul, I wasn't smart enough to come up with that. I needed a coach. And you said something real important. And I do want to comment. I wish I had known you, well over a year ago, because I certainly would have used you, because I like your approach, but you have to, I didn't know what I didn't know because I'm sales, I'm not marketing.
Yes.
You know, I tell my stories with my curriculum to help people remember it. But what was
Right.
my story?
Exactly.
That's a different, you know, from a marketing perspective online. I had never had to do that because everything I did was word of mouth with my corporate clients. So this whole new game started. I needed to talk to someone, and I'm pretty smart, Paul, if I do say so myself. I
Yep.
had no
I agree.
idea. Yeah, thank you. I love you. I had no idea. I had no idea where to go, what to do, how to create, how to come up with, you know, changing the sales game. So I do agree that we need somebody to talk to pull those questions out of
Yes.
us so we understand truly what our story is and how that relates to our business and how we can leverage, that might not be the right word, but leverage our story to help people understand truly who we are and our why. And I just share one quick story. So I did, part of our homework is to do LinkedIn posts, and we support each other, right? Because there's algorithms and all of this on the social media platforms. You know about that. And so I wrote an article. My husband and I had just gone to see the Spider-Man movie, the new one, you know, a couple of months ago. And Marvel, when you stay, nobody leaves the theater because we know little credits and then they give you a little blip of what's coming, right? Yeah. We all sat there and I giggled. I said, it's like a secret society. We all knew to wait. So what does that mean for business? So for me, it's what's that tangible thing that, changing the sales game does. That's like that trailer. It's about serving and creating that community where we know what to expect, in this case for Marvel. And people responded, you're the only crazy person that could connect Marvel to business. Who does that? But see, it was an important message, and we could take something that someone is doing well, and for understanding what does that mean for people to get to know what is so special about you. Marvel does the trailer. That's what we're talking about. That's that piece of what is our story.
Right. And another way of looking at that, Connie, and I write about this in the book. So, you know, we began today by talking about why storytelling is important in business. And I mentioned the biological end of it. And I mentioned Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. Yeah. So two very interesting dudes. Jung, of course, one of the greatest psychiatrists ever, as esteemed in the industry, and, you know, has made it into popular culture. Yeah. So here's the thing. It's World War I. He's practicing in Switzerland. Switzerland in World War I and World War II is a neutral country. So what that means is, as the war is raging on every border of that country, people who are displaced are coming to Switzerland because it's safe there. A lot of them obviously are having some problems dealing with being in a war. They go to see a psychiatrist whose name is Carl Jung. Jung puts these people on his couch, and what does he discover? Regardless of language, job, economic attainment, where they came from, they are having the same stories play over and over in their heads. This leads Jung to the concept of what he called the collective unconscious. In short, it seems that the human brain is wired to tell certain stories over and over again. And in our work, we call these archetypal stories. And there are 12 major families of stories. So an example would be the outlaw. Dirty Harry in the movies, maybe. Sure. Robin Hood.
Sure.
Business, Southwest Airlines. Whatever all the other airlines do, Southwest does differently. Got to stand in stupid lines to get on this airline's plane? Not at Southwest. Got to pay baggage fees at this airline? Not at Southwest. And if you look at their advertising over the last few years, you can see they literally have, you know, baggage handlers rescuing people like Robin Hood from the bad airlines, or gate agents doing this, right? So that's one example. The sage would be another one. The everyman, the lover, the caregiver. And you kind of get an idea of where I'm going with here. But this fits with what we talked about earlier, Connie. When we work with companies and organizations to help them uncover, develop, and then share their capital S story, we align them with the archetype that best describes who they are as an organization. And then, and this is where, as you pointed out earlier in this episode, you know, a lot of business leaders fall off the wagon. They want to get to features and benefits and bullet points. That's right. Not yet. Tell people what kind of an organization, what kind of a company you are first, and then align the specifics of your business to bring that to life, right?
Yeah, I love that Southwest story. So I have a question. Is there a badass archetype?
Yeah, it would be the outlaw. I mean, if you think about from pop culture, the dirty Harrys of the world, vigilante justice, yeah, or Star Wars. I mentioned Joseph Campbell, the most famous professor never to get a PhD. So during the Depression, he tries to get into a PhD program. It's the Depression. So what's he going to do? Campbell travels the world. He travels the world. His study is mythology. So he's interested in world religions. He goes all over the world, and what does he discover? Regardless of economic attainment, language, culture, country, when it comes to religions, by and large, we're telling the same stories all over again.
Love it.
Leads him to this concept that he calls the hero's journey, or the monomyth. A dude named George Lucas decides to do a bunch of movies in the 1970s. He finds Joseph Campbell and sits down with him and says, I think you've cracked the code on the idea of the hero's journey, the story. And out of that comes Star Wars. This is what we're talking about in terms of applying the value, the passion, the uniqueness of your organization's story to success in getting employees, getting customers, partners, et cetera, et cetera. What is your capital S story? Then you can pick the colors of your logo.
Yeah.
Later. Don't blow
later.
Yeah, don't blow $10,000 on brochures nobody's ever going to read because you didn't bother to figure out how to engage people and what story you need to tell.
You know what's funny, Paul, is I agree with everything you're saying, like 1,000%, right? But I think what happens is people here tell your story, and then they tell their story, but they don't connect it to the business or to how they can support or help the client. They get in their own story. And I've read too many blog posts and again, part of this writing group where people write and it's almost self-indulgent because it's their story, but they don't connect it to anything that's relevant to, in this case, let's say the reader, right, on LinkedIn or in these articles on the New York Post or New York Times Magazine, whatever. So that's where I see, and I read it, and oftentimes I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so self-indulgent. Waste of my time, where they think they're telling their story. Do you see that a lot where it's that little disconnect?
You just described most of business marketing.
Yeah.
My business coach and I, my business chair, we have this joke, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me? And unfortunately, a lot of marketing and sales too, that's the way it goes.
It is. Yeah.
Jabber, jabber, jabber. It's all about me. It's got to be about your audience. In our story correcting process, which we is trademarked, we do at our company, and we help people uncover and develop their capital S story. There's 3 core elements to your great story. Number 1, it has to be authentic. So what does that mean? If you and I are walking to lunch and we're crossing an intersection, I get to one side, you're still on the other side, and what auto accident happens in the middle. We saw the same accident, but you saw something slightly different than I did.
Sure.
That's okay. The business corollary here is you have competitors, okay? It's okay for your perspective to be a little bit different than theirs. In fact, it's good as long as it's authentic. Don't make stuff up. Number 2, you got to have a fluent storyteller. Somebody who's self-indulgent is not a good storyteller. And by the way, it's your tech company. Who's the better storyteller about why your software or your product should be bought by everybody on the face of the earth? The person who invented it or the CEO? Far too often in business, we just reflexively go to the person at the top of the totem pole and say, you got to tell the story. They may be a great CEO. They might not be a great storyteller. Another example, healthcare. If I'm deciding which hospital organization is going to take care of my daughter for a very important surgery, do I want to hear their story from the CEO or the people who are going to take care of her? I want to talk to the doctors and the nurses That's who I want to be, the fluent storyteller.
Absolutely.
So that's second point. It's got to be a fluent storyteller. And third, and you've already talked about this, you've hit on it so well, Connie, it's engagement. If you don't have an audience, if you're not continually engaging your audience, what is the point? You know, in the old days, when I started the company, I'd go visit people in person. It'd be winter, and I'd go hang my coat in the closet. And I'd open the closet door, and there would be the 10,000 brochures. The brochures that marketing ordered and never bothered to ask sales about, that somebody paid for, and they spent so much money on them, they won't throw them away, but nobody's using them. And that's because they didn't bother to figure out the people they're selling to, where can they be reached? What kind of story do they want to be told, right? So you got to have your capital S story, but you got to deliver it at the time, at the place, and in the way the audience you want is going to receive it. You just can't sit there and say, well, you know, I'm Paul and I like to listen to podcasts, so I'm going to throw all my marketing money on podcasts. If my audience is not there, then why am I going to do that, right? There's got to be a better focus than that.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you said like marketing doesn't talk to sales. Of course, I find that all the time because
Yes.
I'm in sales. And so, especially with my corporate clients, more so than my private clients, you know, my
Sure.
smaller business owners. But on the corporate side, you know, they'll come down and say, yeah, marketing's doing a campaign. Okay. But we're focusing on building behaviors and skills that we're not pushing a product. So how can they support us with the campaigns
Right.
based on what we're seeing? Because you're the ones talking to the clients, not marketing. And here's the other thing too. The marketing departments, they're doing their research, which is needed as well. But internally, I think they need to, because there's skill level involved as well.
Yes.
Right. So if marketing is pushing, again, maybe pushing is not the right word, but they're creating based on their market research, and they're not talking to the demographics of the people specifically in their business footprint, that market research might not be appropriate. Additionally, what are the skills and what are the employees who are the salespeople, right? Talking to the actual client live, what support do they need? And they're always working not in tandem, but like side by side, and there's never communication. It's dangerous. It's like, I see this all the time in organizations as well, where the CEO or the executives, they make decisions and they implement strategies and, you know, plans, right? Their 5-year plan or whatever it is. And they never ask the employees,
Yes.
what do you think? How does the software working for you? Is there too much on your plate? Can we take that and automate that for you? They don't have conversations, and they'll do these town meetings. That's the other big thing now with corporate, right? They do the town meetings, but it's about delivering information about the strategic plan, not asking for input on how they can make the plan better. So you have this disconnection because nobody's talking to anyone, because there's not an alignment with, at the end of the day, I think it's the storytelling, that messaging, right?
Right. And you know, this is such a critical point, Connie. Storytelling is a participative engagement. The audience needs to be involved, right? How many times, back to your Marvel example, how many times have you or the audience been to a show or a play or a movie and you said to yourself, boy, I wish it hadn't ended. I really enjoyed that. Well, this is, in a business sense, the kind of experience we're trying to create. And, you know, a town hall where the executives come in and say, all right, we're going to have a dialogue now. Sit down, shut up, and listen. That's not going to work.
It's not a dialogue.
It's not a dialogue, exactly. And great stories are a dialogue. You know, the research shows, and I have this in the book, there was a Princeton study done about 10 or 12 years ago. They had a woman, put her inside a functional MRI and watch her brainwaves. And she told the story of the worst prom date ever. And then they brought in 30 test subjects and they put them in the tube and they just listened to her story. Well, wouldn't you know it, their brainwaves behaved in exactly the same way as hers when she was telling the story. See, great storytelling, the storyteller, Connie, and the audience, they move in sync. It's like that great dance team from the 1930s movies, you know, Rogers and Astaire, right? The storyteller and the audience move in sync.
Yeah.
And what that means, to your point, is the audience is part of the story. You're not successfully sharing your story if the audience is not part of it. And that's why, those three principles: authenticity, a fluent storyteller, engagement. Engagement is probably the most critical. If I'm the greatest opera singer in the world, which I definitely am not, but let's say I am, and I'm singing in some place in the outback in Australia, and I don't have YouTube, and nobody knows who I am, what's going on there? Not success, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm giggling. The engagement piece, I think we
Right.
miss way too much because we want to get into our own head. The other
Yeah.
thing, the MRI with the woman, and then people listening to that story and having the same reaction. Paul, at the end of the day, humans are humans, and everybody thinks, nope, no, my story or my way of doing
Yes.
this, it's going to make
Yes.
the difference. But if a person is a person, we learn the same way. It was funny. We were talking, I don't remember where the heck I was, and we were talking about the education for kids. And
Yes.
sometimes they try to, they want to get better ratings, right? The school with SATs, whatever it might
Oh,
be,
yes.
depending on where the kids are. So kids are in kindergarten and they're pushing that they need to know mathematics, at the calculus level, and they're kindergarten kids. I don't care how good the teacher is, how good the story is, how good the engagement is. Their brain cannot handle the information that's being
Well,
shared.
yes.
So humans are humans. And I think we forget that alignment, that MRI was just such a great example, that their brain waves reacted the same way as the woman who told the story because of the emotional connection, right? That biology that,
Yes.
was part of my intro. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just fascinating. Humans are humans.
We are. And the thing about narrative too, in our company, we work with a lot of companies that have complex products or services. That's our sweet spot.
Yeah.
When you think of a story, think of it, like a book. Even if you don't like to read books, you have chapters. Think about the Apple story. The Apple story in the beginning is Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, right? And then Jobs leaves the company and has a falling out and goes over to Next, and then starts Pixar, one of my favorite companies, and then comes back to Apple, and Apple is different. The iPod comes out, and then the iPhone, and each one of those events is a separate chapter in the company's story. And if you are selling complex products or services, it's helpful to understand, to your point, that we as humans, we can't take in all of Tolstoy or something like that in one sitting. You need to give us the information in bite-sized pieces so that we understand, right? This is why, as an example, the Marvel movies, one of the reasons why that franchise is so successful is because they keep creating new, engaging chapters of the story. I have friends who are really Marvel geeks, and they'll say stuff like, well, this character was never a hero, that big a hero in, the comic books when I was a kid. Well, fine, so what? If they find a way to turn that character and that part of the story into a success, I salute them, right? And the same is true for our businesses and the things we're trying to do in marketing and selling the value that we bring to the world.
And, COVID taught us nothing. You got to reiterate, you got to kind of rebalance yourself.
Yes.
Because everybody was affected in a certain way, right? Whatever that means to the listeners, to you, to me. How has that impacted my business? How has that impacted how I share my message now, right? There's again, chapters. I like how you said that there's chapters in our business. And I shared with you, right, 21 years ago when I started my business at Whitman and Associates with this beautiful little square with the big W, it was very appropriate back then. But now fast forward, it was old and dated. And I'm not old and dated. Chuckle there.
You are not. I will agree with you.
I love you, brother from another mother.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, but see, again, that to say that what was 21 years ago, it's not who I am now 2 decades later. My kids are grown, my own business experience, the ups and downs, marriage, through that, and all the complexities of that, and client engagement. So how could that story not change? That's illogical to me.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's important to have an agency like yours that can get us started, and then annually or every 2 years, whatever it is, to
Right.
say, hey, let's circle back. What are the changes? What has changed in the society, right?
Exactly.
COVID, what has happened in our economy? Like right now, we're probably going into a deep recession, maybe a depression here in the US. So how is that impacting business? The story's going to change.
Yes, it absolutely will. And
Yeah,
people expect that, right? There are narratives that are timeless, Robin Hood or Dirty Harry or Luke
sure.
Skywalker. Well, why do we keep telling those stories over and over again?
That's right.
Because we evolve them, right? So if your organization, your business has a core value to customers, other stakeholders, it can't be the same as it was in 1980, right?
That's right.
There can be timeless truths about your business, and hooray for you if you have them, but you need to continually evolve how you're sharing that story.
Yeah. Got to stay fresh. You got to keep it fresh.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we lose the engagement. Also, the generations, right? The
Yes,
younger generation are opening businesses, and they're in their careers, and they're eager to learn. But you can't tell the story like a grandma or grandpa. You have
that's
to
right.
make it relevant to them and the technology. Even though I didn't grow up with technology, these kids are coming out of the womb with an iPhone. So how do you relate it through the technology and ask questions so they can share how do you know what, I get advice from the younger generation through my training.
Sure.
They share new you should look into, and I'm like, ooh, that's great, I'll research it. If I have any questions, can I reach out to you? They're so eager to please, and they feel like, ooh, she's asking me for help,
There
right?
you
And
go.
she's the business owner, I'm just starting out. We all have relevance that we can bring to the table and share, whatever that means, right? But it's, again, for me, it's
Absolutely.
about the engagement a lot. We're out of time, but everyone, you got to buy the book, right? Finding your capital S story, why your story drives your brand. The story is really the starting point for creating your brand. So if you have questions, please, I'm going to put it in the show notes, but Paul's email is paul.furiga@wordwritepr.com. Check out his website at wordwritepr, and write is WRITE.
Yes,
PR.com. Again, that will be in the show notes. And you do have a free gift for my peeps.
I do. We're going to put a link on the website in the show notes that takes people to a free chapter of the book. So you
Perfect.
can see for yourself what we're talking about today in a little bit more detail. And I hope
Love it.
you folks enjoy it.
Love it. Thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's cool because if anybody is struggling, and hey, I have a lot of corporate people that follow me as well, because I play in both areas. So if you're in a marketing department, you know what, maybe Paul can, consult with you, or maybe just read the book, even if that helps.
Absolutely.
But we need to make sure that we stay relevant, our stories are relevant, and that they apply and land for people. Because what do we want to do at the end of the story? You want people to take action,
Yes.
right? To
Yes.
change whatever it is that they're trying to create. Otherwise, why are they reading the book? Why are they hiring Paul? Why are they hiring Connie? We want movement, right? We want change at the end of the day. Paul, as always, I just love spending time with you, and I think you're brilliant. And
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Likewise.
oh, thank you. I think that the storytelling, people are talking about storytelling and branding, but I like how you go even a bigger arch than
Yes.
that, right? It's more than just storytelling and branding. It's about doing it right, being authentic. What were the three? It
Yes.
was authentic,
Fluent storyteller and
and
engagement.
engagement. And I
And
think if we miss any one of those, it lands kind of, it lands flat, and
like
it
the
doesn't.
three-legged stool that's not well balanced because
100,
of get the three
amen. Yeah.
pillars. Yep.
Yeah, agree. You kind of tip over. So thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and information, research, all of the things that you've put together. And thank you for sharing the free chapter in the book. All of that will be in the show notes for you guys. So no worries about that. Paul, thank you again. And thank you all for joining me weekly as we question, build, and discover together how to grow and challenge ourselves so that we can all embrace change, whatever that means to you. And again, hopefully, Paul shared some strategies, ideas for you that you can apply immediately, even if it's just for you to start to jot down, what is my story and why would anyone else care, right? Connect it back to the person that you're telling the story to. It's not about us. It's not ego driven, right? It's about how does that story relate to help someone with whatever their situation is. And maybe you could be the change agent to support your clients, people in your organization, people in your family, if that's where you can share some help. So again, Paul, thank you. Thank you all for joining me. You've been listening to Enlightenment of Change with me, your host, Connie Whitman, on webtalkradio.net. I wish you all an inspired week, and I am honored that you join me weekly. And again, I hope you picked up a tip or two from Paul that you can apply, create action, and that's where the movement comes in. And that is where the magic happens, my friends. I love you all. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Have a great one.